Doing, Alec? You okay?
Yeah, I'm fantastic. Thanks very much. I can't wait to talk about the book for a minute or two. But I'm afraid I'm going to have to take you on a bit of a journey, and it's into your past. Now, lucky enough, you're young enough that you don't have to go back too far. But um, take me back to your earliest memories. Not that I take people back to school, but you had a slightly different start in life.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I know I look 14, but I'm actually 42. So probably going back about 30 odd years. And I suppose that a good place to start is whenever I joined a new team up in just outside Belfast called Lisburn Youth. And I was only 11 years old, and I didn't know it at the time, but the new team actually had a Spurs scout and a Liverpool scout watching the training that evening. And my first day of training, after probably 5 or 10 minutes, something must have been happening, because suddenly I saw two guys making their way around the pitch to my dad, who's on the other side of the pitch to them.
Right.
And one was a Spurs scout, one was a Liverpool scout. And the story goes that because the Spurs scout was about 20 years younger than the Liverpool scout, he got round, and fast forward 5-10 years, I was suddenly at Tottenham Hotspur as a professional footballer. But yeah, that was the start of my journey into this world of professional football.
Wow. So he got first dibs on you by just being a bit quicker off the mark.
Younger and quicker.
Younger and quicker. Okay, well, I'm afraid us older people have to accept that as part of life. So what was it like? I mean, you're pulled out of playing for a small team in Belfast to go over to London. What was that like for somebody of your age?
Thinking about it now, it was very exciting, was probably the first part. And after about 24 hours of being in London, incredibly daunting, because I actually traveled over with three lads from Dublin. We had another guy from Wales who joined the Spurs youth team in 1994, and it was funny because Spurs had just signed Jurgen Klinsmann after the
Oh, I
World
remember
Cup
him, yeah.
in USA in '94, and he's already a World Cup winner.
Sure.
He's just an absolute superstar, almost looked like a movie star, and I'm kind of standing next to him in training just because the first team weren't back and the press had turned up and wanted to get some photographs. And for most of the players, I'm assuming they probably thought this was amazing. We're training with Jurgen Klinsmann, a World Cup winner. But for me, I actually had this huge inferiority complex of thinking, if this guy is a professional footballer, first team player at Tottenham Hotspur, a Premier League guy, and an international player, and if that's what it takes to be that, there's no way in the world I'm ever going to be able to get to that level. And it was this self-doubt and massive limiting belief that I just created, probably through no fault of my own, within seconds of standing next to Jurgen Klinsmann. And it's quite difficult to explain just how much of an impact that had on me over the next few years at Spurs.
And that must have been quite interesting, because it is a challenge for somebody of your age group. But I'm sure there was a helping hand, an arm around the shoulder in terms of helping you psychologically around that, was there not?
I wish I could say there was. Unfortunately, there wasn't in the '90s. The way it was, and this, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm saying this is the way it was. That you went to training, and to put it into context, a week before I was training with my team that had just left for 1 hour a week playing five-side in the local gym, and the week later I'm training 6 hours a day, 6 days a week in pre-season with some of the best professionals in the world, the likes of Teddy Sheringham, Jurgen Klinsmann, Nick Barmby, Darren Anderton, Sol Campbell. So it was just very, very difficult to deal with. And as soon as you were done, the fact that it was, more training, more effort than I'd ever experienced, you're just left to go home. And apart from the fact that I just went home and cried because of the physical, exertion that we had, but then also cried because you're away from friends and family. You have no support. I could have gone out drinking every night if I wanted to. Not that I had any energy to do that, but there was absolutely no mentors, no support, nothing that I can think, yeah, this was a really good thing to have around my life at that time.
Yeah, it must have posed an interesting challenge, but not just for you, but for maybe the whole of the youth team, and not just in Spurs, but right across the football fraternity.
Yeah, and I suppose it's like anything. If you don't know differently, then you can't complain. You can't compare it to anything. Of course, I was already out of my comfort zone. The fact that I was left Belfast and walking around the bright lights of London, and not realizing just how huge the place is. What is there? 1 million people in Northern Ireland. I think there was about 4 or 5 million people in the Republic at that time, and there's nearly 10 million people in London.
Yeah.
it's hard to fathom, but the very quickly I realized that this was just too much for me, and almost like a cut above what I had to offer.
I mean, there's a certain strength in what you've talked about. I mean, as you said, you could have been out every night drinking, which unfortunately I think many people might have found themselves doing. So, where did you reach inside for yourself to get the inner strength to stay there as opposed to hopping the first plane home?
Well, it was interesting because, that many times when I thought, am I cut out for this? Should I be going home, and just thinking it's just not for me? But it came a point when I was about 17, so just before my 18th birthday, and it was funny. I had a friend from Belfast whose sister married an English guy, and he just took a shine to me, and a couple of months or a month before my birthday in November 95, he gave me a book, and this book was called Awaken, the Giant Within. And the fact that I'm only 5'6" kind of resonated with me, because I
Right.
thought that's quite good for my size. And it was by a guy called Tony Robbins, Anthony Robbins, who, 30 years later is one of the biggest
Good.
personal development gurus on the planet. And I remember reading this book and just thinking, you know, I didn't realize how closed off I was to this world of psychology, mental performance, mindset. And for him to, and I say him, Tony Robbins, to share some strategies, some tools in this book, put me on a completely different trajectory than I ever thought I could do, because it was a bit like taking the blinkers off. And I didn't even realize I had blinkers. So this is all part of
Right.
the learning process, isn't it?
Mm.
And whenever I read this, 500-page book, and I suppose even the fact that I wanted to do that, maybe give you an insight into my open-mindedness or my willingness to learn as a young man. And effectively, the message in the book was, stop looking outside of yourself,
Mm.
because everything you will ever need, you already have within. Now,
Mm.
saying that to anyone at any stage, if they don't know that, is probably quite powerful and incredibly empowering. As a 17-year-old kid who was kind of, lost in London, who wanted to be a professional footballer, who was almost within touching distance of that, but didn't really ever feel like I could get there, has, had such a profound effect on me, put me on a completely different path of towards, growing, improving, this growth mindset that probably started as a result of reading that book.
It's amazing. I mean, you've talked about something there that, and again, it must have been influential, and people underestimate sometimes the powers of those around you who can influence you in the right way. Putting that arm around you and handing you that book, for a lot of people, they would have read about the first 2 pages and put it down thinking, my God, look at the size of this thing. As opposed to yourself, something inspired you to read that book.
Yeah, and I don't know what it was. It's very difficult to understand, what you were thinking, your mindset from, quite a long time ago. All I know is that I was struggling. I wasn't achieving what I wanted in my life, as in I wasn't getting picked for the team. I never really seemed to perform well. I never got any of the accolades that other players in my teams were getting. And it was that striving for a better life. And
Right.
whatever that is, whatever it's a deep human need, to want to do better, be better, have more in our lives. And I suppose also maybe that fear of, I didn't want to go back home with my tail between my legs and thinking, I'd tried to make this in Tottenham Hotspur and didn't quite work out. So, I'm back again. And so it was a case of, okay, let's assess, what can I do? What is within my power that I can do that might help me achieve my goals? With absolutely no guarantee that what you do is going to do that, but at least I could work towards it. So I started seeing a sports psychologist. And again, not because I thought things were, so bad. It was just more,
Yeah.
I'm performing at this level. How can I improve? What can I do better? So seeing a sports psychologist, had a conversation with my dad, and my dad's, a really big golf fan.
Sure.
And he said, why don't you try visualization? Jack Nicklaus, best golfer ever. Before he plays every golf shot, visualizes where he wants the ball to go. And I'm sure it could work for football. Again, he sent me over this cassette. I'm sure, Alec, you'll remember what a cassette is, right?
Yeah, I do, unfortunately.
Some people, who are listening might not necessarily know what it is. But anyway, so he sent me across a cassette. I used to listen to it every night before going to bed. I'd get up in the morning, visualize what I wanted to do going into training that day. And the interesting part in all of this is, now, again, it's hard to give you everything in a chronological order, but if I jump
Sure.
20 years, fact that I'm now, speaking for companies around the world. And one of the sessions I talk about is this visualization that I did. And when I show a little goals montage of me scoring goals after a 20-year professional footballing career, the exact same visualization scenario that I did back in London in 1995 is me getting the ball on the left hand side, cutting into the edge of the box, and then curling it in the far top right hand corner. And the majority of the goals that I scored in a 20-year career was me getting the ball on the left hand side of the pitch, cutting in and curling it in the far top corner. So again, the interesting part of all of this is the fact that I've gone on and studied my master's in psychology. It just helps me understand more cause and effect. What we do, what does that lead to, and what's the impact of it. So I suppose I couldn't say that just because I did the visualization, that's why I scored the goals. But I suppose a better question might be is, do you think it's a coincidence that the visualization I was doing every single morning, season after season, for about 5 or 6 seasons, at the end of my career, was the exact same goal that I
Yeah.
was visualizing?
No. One of the questions I suppose our listeners would be asking is, how do you block out the voices that we all have in our head? Because, when people try to either meditate or visualize, you keep hearing these voices that distract you.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I probably got better as I did it more and more. And I suppose that's just like anything. The more that you practice something, whether you're learning an instrument, whether it's learning a language, the more you do something, the better you're going to get at it. And when I started doing it, I was really struggling. I couldn't quite get the entire scenario run through from start to finish. But by the end of it, what I also was doing was I created an anchor. And all an anchor
Right.
was a physical way for me to replicate. The reason why visualization works from a scientific point of view is because you're ingraining neural pathways in your brain.
Right.
And the neural pathway that I was creating, even though I physically hadn't scored a goal at White Hart Lane, the old Tottenham Hotspur pitch, because I physically hadn't scored a goal, but I practiced it so often. And every time I practice it, I would just do this with my fingers, which is effectively just putting my thumb and second finger together and pressing it together really hard. So
Right.
that created an anchor for me. And then as I started playing games, as I started playing in the first team, I would sit before the match, a couple of minutes before the match, before the whistle goes, before we walk out onto the pitch. And I'd be on my seat doing that, which means straight away in my head, I'm going back to this visualization. So it's all about just trying to implement these tools and techniques that are universally accepted. You go into golf, people do it. You go into motorsports, people do it. In business, people are visualizing what they want to create in their life. Now, whether it's a bigger office, a new car, whether it's walking into their new £1 million home, whatever it is, it's always about people visualizing first in their mind what they want to create in their lives.
It's amazing because what you've identified in terms of sport, and I mean, you've cut your teeth in sport, and it's also relevant in business, that the best, in no matter what field you're in, have a team around them, a team of mentors, a team of psychologists, a team of advisors. And yet so many business people seem to want to try and do it on their own.
Mm. And I think it's one of the things that I've just accepted, that to be successful in anything, you're not going to do it by yourself, because let's be honest, you can't be an expert in all areas.
Hmm.
Even just my area that I'm most passionate about is the psychology and mental performance. But if I was to put that into a football context or sporting context, I'm not an expert in physiology or nutrition or biomechanics or strength and conditioning. So there's so many different areas. So I suppose because I've been always part of a multidisciplinary team from a sports context, that's why I've seen the strength of why these work so well when you get a whole lot of people working together all towards a common goal, which again, Alec, probably comes back to most people in my experience. And this isn't a judgmental statement. It's more an observation that
Yeah.
so many people that I come across are really unclear about what they actually want to achieve. So if you haven't got that clarity, that real vision of what you're trying to achieve, it's probably no wonder that most people, when they're working 40, 50, 60 hours a week, they probably, can wake up at 35, 40, 50, whatever age you are, and wake up and they're a bit like, why am I doing this? What's
Yeah.
the point of me working towards this? Because they have no idea what their bigger picture, and it obviously comes back to their purpose. What's
Tell
your
me about this. I mean, from your psychology training and again, as an international speaker, what do you find is the most common reason that people don't have maybe written defined goals for them to follow?
I would say that it's just something that's not very common in life. And the reason why I'm saying it, it's almost like a cultural thing because in the workplace, if you walk in and ask anybody in any business, that's employed or even like the directors, the senior leadership team, what are you working towards? What's your goal or target for this year? I would say, 98, 99, hopefully, 100% of people have an idea of what they're working towards because that's the culture of business. That's what you weigh. That's the way the best businesses, the most successful businesses have operated for a long time. They have targets, they have processes, and they work towards them, and either they'll hit them or improve or not as well. Put that into a personal situation. A lot of people don't wake up in the morning. They're like, what am I working towards? It's
Right.
just a bit of a, in this part of the world, in our society, it's a bit like you go to university or you go to school, you might go to university, you get a job, you might retire.
Yeah.
But again, that's, and again, it's not a judgmental thing. It's more to say that that's the way a lot of people have done it. Whereas because of the way that I've been brought up, because like going back to that book at 17, from a 17-year-old kid, I was starting to set goals for myself. And I'll give you an example. Because of the limiting belief that I had with Jurgen Klinsmann about myself, I would walk into the dressing room and you'd have some senior pros like a Gary Mabbott or David Kerslake, all these different players that are, really experienced guys. And they were saying things like, Paul, play as long as you can.
Yeah.
Playing days are the best days of your life. You'll be a long time retired. You'll miss it when it's gone.
Yeah.
Because I'd read that book and because I was starting to evaluate my beliefs, and I used to think, I don't actually believe that. I don't think you should play as long as you can. I don't think you'll miss it when you're gone. I don't think it's the best days of your life because, of course, what's the inference? The inference is that as soon as you stop playing, if you're lucky, you might get to 35. Most people retire 30 or younger. Does that mean the rest of your life is nowhere near as enjoyable through your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s? And Alec, hopefully you can back me up on this, that life gets better as you get older. I actually retired at 32 and it was the best decision I ever made.
Yeah.
So even just starting to challenge the beliefs that are held in society, because not all of them are very helpful.
I suppose I show my age now because I was expected to join a safe pensionable job for life when I was 18.
And how did that work out for you?
I lasted about 8 years in it, screaming, came out screaming. So, uh, but I think we're lucky these days because education is available and accessible to everyone. So, like, I mean, you're out there talking to business leaders at the moment. What are the key messages you're giving to them?
The big part for me is that in my experience, and again, I'll use the sport in context, just to get into a Premier League dressing room, technically, an individual or a player needs to be pretty spectacular. He needs to have beaten off all the competition. He needs to be better than all of the thousands, millions of people that he was competing against over the years. But that's just to get in the dressing room. So if technically, just to get into the room, you need to be outstanding, it's a bit like, I don't know, KPMG or PwC or Deloitte EY. They're bringing in all these, very, very gifted, technically proficient accountants. But then what makes the difference? Did that mean they all perform at the same level? Absolutely not. There's such a massive variance in performance. And then you go, okay, well, if you start to understand what contributes to this performance, then you start going, okay, is it his technical ability or her technical ability? Sometimes, not always, because mostly they're at much of a muchness. So what then probably is the biggest impactor on performance? And for me, in my experience and the people I've worked with and the clients I've worked with and companies, it always comes back to this. It's their psychology, it's their mindset, it's their thinking, it's their attitude. And then, of course, that then leads into behaviors and habits. So if you want to change those behaviors and habits, and of course, most businesses that I work with are trying to influence their staff and their people become more productive, more efficient. And to do that, you need to be influencing their psychology. And I call it a mental performance because you can have your technical performance, but for me, without sometimes there's a connotation around the word psychology. So
Yeah.
I prefer using the word mental performance because it's then what are you doing in here that's going to allow you to work whatever you need to do so that you get the outcome that you have decided you want.
Just for our listeners there, maybe you might give them your website or how to find out more about you.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's paulmcveigh.co.uk, and of course I'm on a lot on social media, especially LinkedIn or Twitter or Instagram. But yeah, it's to do with, I love sharing these kind of stories, these kind of hopefully some nuggets of information, because it was the kind of content or topics that just really put me on a different path in life. And if I was never given that book, I don't know whether I would have started exploring this world of mindset
Yeah.
and personal development and growth and improvement. But because I have, and then because it's been part of the world of professional sport where you need to improve every day. And not only do you need to improve, you need to be even better than everyone else around you. So it's just been part of my life that's been so ingrained. But going back to your previous point, Alec, it also has to do with the people you have around you, the coaches, the mentors, because you've got so much to learn all the time. And, as I say, I'm 42, learning so much all the time. But that's also why I love this world.
It's quite interesting. Sport has changed quite significantly. I mean, we were talking about how virtually you were left on your own to struggle and deal with these various issues around maybe overawed, self-awareness and things in sport, which has moved on in leaps and bounds over the years. I don't believe young people, particularly in the Premiership now, would be left to their own devices. But I think it would be fair to say that a lot of businesses, and we're talking about maybe the top people as well, while they bring a package together in terms of their employees, but don't give them the full package, if you know what I mean. There's still those gaps that you might have found in sport donkeys years ago are still missing in the world of business.
Well, it's pretty much all my clients, and that's everybody from Microsoft, the PwC, the Barclays, the Cisco. They see that the people they're bringing in are their assets, and there are very few companies that are physically producing things that I work with, because everybody, and Microsoft's a great example, because they see that their people are their assets. The more they develop their people, the more productive they'll be, the better their bottom line will be, the more profits they'll have. And so the more they develop their people, the better the company does. So it's a very, very simple correlation. And if you want to develop your people, you either give them the technical skills to do the job, you give them the resources of what they need to do it, or you develop their mindset and psychology of how they do it. And that one area for me is why I've been doing this for 10 years since I stopped playing football. And again, it comes back to that original conversation of play as long as you can. Well, I
Yeah.
actually stopped playing when I was 32. We just won the league. We just got promoted into the championship with Norwich City. And it was under Paul Lambert. And, in the next year got promoted again into the Premier League. But I decided to step away from football, not because I was retired, not because, my legs had gone, or, I'm very fortunate I didn't have any injuries. But that was because I thought I want to take a different path in life. And this is something that I'm so passionate about, which is why, I love doing what I'm doing.
I think people sort of underestimate the ability to pivot their lives, never mind business, but to pivot their lives in terms of, because they find themselves doing a lot of things that they really hate. When there's opportunities out there to find something you really love, often we call it a hobby, but to monetize it.
Yeah, well, and again, this all comes back to it hurts me whenever I hear people talk about their job and what they do for a living, you know, and not enjoying it. And again, just as a really simple statistic I saw on a Gallup poll, they do big governmental surveys, and this is around the UK, but apparently, again, this is Gallup statistics, there's about 10 or 15% of the working population in the UK. I think that's about 30 million people on average, who go to work, who absolutely love their job. They love the job, really like the job, probably like you, Alec, would probably do it for free, even if you didn't get paid.
Yeah, I think there's a lottery win needed in there to support that ambition. But anyway, go on.
I'm very fortunate. I had 20 years. I was kicking the ball around the field, and then suddenly someone said, "Want to pay you some money to do that?" I'm like, "Absolutely." And then some crazy man went, "Want to pay you some more?" And put you in front of 1,000. I'm like, "Okay, absolutely." And then when I come out of football, I now talk about what I did in football. So for me, I'm obviously very blessed, very fortunate that I'm able to do this job that I love, and we definitely do it for free.
But there's great news. I mean, if you think about your own career, you started playing football through a series of events, found yourself reading a book that became a major influence in your life that was to take you off on a completely new pathway. And that's available to everybody. You know, education is there for everybody to find out.
Absolutely. The especially the information age that we live in now, the fact that I did my degree distance learning whenever I was playing football when I was in my late 20s, the fact that I did my master's distance learning as I was doing this work. I was working as a sports psychologist as well as a speaker around the world doing this, and there's just it is available for, if you have an internet connection and a phone, it's
Yeah.
generally available to you. And it's interesting, just to finish off on the other end of the spectrum of people who love their jobs, there's 10 or 15% of the population who really hate the job, don't like it, almost actively trying to take down the organization. That's how crazy it is. But that leaves 70% of people, this is in the UK, of course, who go to work, who don't love it or hate it. They just do it. They're just apathetic, ambivalent. They do not care. And for me, that's so sad to hear, because I could never think of doing something that I really don't like doing, getting up every single day to go and do a job that I hated or don't even care about doing. So that's why for me, it's really important to find that passion in life, then start, if you can work on it, to do something that you really enjoy, because you just completely change the quality of your life and your whole reality of your world.
Well, what it suggests is that there's a massive pool of talent that are in organizations, and possibly they're just in the wrong part of the organization. That if management was to fully understand what the passions are that drive them, could possibly move them sideways or move them into a part of the organization that might stimulate them in a much better way.
Listen, whenever I stopped playing 10 years ago, I did not know exactly what I wanted to do. So I kind of spread the net. I started doing some of this speaking for organizations, doing some sort of corporate training, which, and I've been doing that for a long time. I also worked in the media. So I was very fortunate, worked for like Sky Sports, Soccer Saturday, doing BT Sport, having a show on the BBC. So I tried the media. And I also tried to do the sports psychology, because I thought, still working
Yeah.
in football. So there's three different areas in my life. By the time I'd been doing that for 7 years and finished my master's, I thought, what do I love most? And for me, it was going, right, let's get rid of the sports psychology, because I've been done that for 25 years in that world. Don't need to do any more of that. The
Yeah.
media was fun, a lot of fun, good times, but didn't love it. Wasn't a passion. I just enjoyed it. I thought, well, let's get rid of that and solely focus on what I know I love, what I get the most buzz from, and what I feel like I'm most contributing to other people and society is around this whole world of mental performance, and sharing this with organizations. And absolutely, what you said is that if people are doing something, they can be that far away from having a real passion in it, but they just haven't found it yet. But that, to me, is back to exploring. If you just stick to what you're doing, then you're not going to be able to find that out.
I suppose in the sort of 30 seconds to 40 seconds we've left, tell us about the book. Great title, but just leave us with that piece so that people can follow up on that.
So the book is called The Stupid Footballer is Dead. Very quickly, it was because I didn't feel like that footballers got the reputation they deserved. Everyone thought we were stupid, but actually we're nowhere near stupid. And I'll just very quickly leave you on something from Jason McAteer, is whenever he actually locked his keys to his car outside his house in Liverpool, and the police car drove past, and he thought he was breaking into it. Anyway, comes up, what was he doing? Jason McAteer was like, "Oh, you're a Liverpool fan? Listen, Jason, why don't you run into the house, bring me out a coat hanger, and I'll break into the car for you." Jason's like, "Brilliant." Runs into the house, comes back out with a wooden coat hanger. So, and I'm like, Jason, I'm trying to give us a different reputation here. We're not all stupid, but actually sometimes we do stupid things.
Wow.